According to our MAE 202 syllabus, tests are worth 60% of the overall grade. Homework, which is 15 assignments, is worth 15%, so that's 1% each. Explanations, reflections, and projects make up another 15%, and notes and activities are worth 10%. And we use a standard 90 to 100, 80 to 89, and so on grading scale to determine the letter grade. So this is, suppose a student in this class has test scores of 79%, 85%, 92%, and 89%. They have 100% on their MyLab Math homework, 54 out of 65 points on their explanations, 15 out of 15 on both reflections, 18 out of 20 on project 1, 19 out of 20 on project 2, and 17.5 out of 20 on project 3, and then 75 out of 80 points on their notes and activities. So we want to figure out what score do they need to earn on the last exam to get an A in the class. So the first thing I might want to do is go ahead and find the student's test average. And I know the test average is 60%. So normally in a weighted average, we would take the weight, in this case 60% or 0.6, and we would multiply it by whatever that category is, in this case the test average. The problem is with this one is that we haven't taken the last test. So I can't actually know what the test average is. So I'm going to have to go about this another way. However, I do know there are 5 tests in this class. So if I take 60 and divide it by 5, I get 12. So that means that 60% divided among 5 tests makes them each worth 12%. So rather than finding the test average, I could just use 12% for each test individually. So I could do 0.12 times their score on the first test was a 79, plus 0.12 times their score on the second test was 85, plus 0.12 times their score on test 3 was a 92, 0.12 times their score on test 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 0.12 times their score. I'm just going to use T for test because I don't know what that 5th test is yet. But this would be how I could do this individually. And I could also, again, I could add up those 5 and divide by 5 and then multiply by 0.6 for 60%, but I don't know that 5th test. All right, so then I want to get the rest of the grades. So right now this is only 60%. I know that the MyLab Math was the next thing listed, and that's 15%. So if I know the homework average, I could multiply that by 0.15. And in this case, it said the student has 100% on their MyLab Math homework. So I could do 0.15 times 100. And then the next category in the grade is the explanations, reflections, and projects. And altogether, explanations, reflections, and projects make up 15%. So I could go ahead and figure out the explanations, reflections, and projects average. So I'm going to use all the information that I have here. So I know that this student has 54 out of 65 points on their explanations. I know that they have 15 out of 15 on both reflections. And then I know their scores on the 3 projects were 18, 19, and 17.5. So those are all of the scores that they got. So I could just add all of this together. So 54 plus 15 plus 15 plus 18 plus 19 plus 17.5. And that is 138.5. Now, that is out of the total. And so it said here 54 out of 65 points on explanation. So there were 65 points possible. each reflection is worth 15 points, so that's still 15 plus 15. But each of the 3 projects was worth 20 points, so that's 20 plus 20 plus 20. So if I add up all the possible points for explanations, reflections, and projects, then I'm going to get 155. So this means that this student has gotten 138.5 out of 155 points. And so we could simply divide that and then multiply by 100 to change it to a percent. So 138.5 divided by 155 is 0.8935, and it keeps going, but then I'm going to multiply that by 100, and I'm going to get 89 point, this decimal keeps going, 354838, and it keeps going. I'm just going to round it and say this is 89.35%. So explanations, reflections, and projects are worth 15% of the overall grade, and I'm going to multiply that by the 89.35 that this student has. All right, so if I look at this, so far I've got 12, 12 is 24, 12 more is 36, 12 more is 48, 12 more is 60, plus 15% would be 75, plus another 15% is 90. So I'm still missing 10%, and that last 10% is from the notes and activities. So I want to do 0.1 or 0.10 if you want, times whatever the student's notes and activity average is. So in this case, it said that this student has 75 out of 80 points on notes and activities. So again, I could just divide that and multiply by 100. And that will give me their average on notes and activities. So 75 divided by 80 is 0.9375, and then multiply that by 100. And this is 93.75%. So I'm going to do 10% times 93.75. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and work this out. I'm going to do all the multiplication first and then go through and do all the addition. So 0.12 times 79 is 9.48. 0.12 times 85 is 10.2. 0.12 times 92 is 11.04. 0.12 times 89 is 10.68. And 0.12 times t, for right now, I'm just going to leave that as 0.12 t. 0.15 times 100 is 15 or 15. 0.15 times 89.35 is 13.4025. And then 0.1 or 0.10 times 93.75 is 9.375. And then I'm going to add all of these, except for this one, because this one's not like terms because it has a T in it, but I'm going to deal with that one shortly. So let me just add up the 9.48, 10.2, 11.04, 10.68, 15, 13.4025, and 9.375. So I'm going to get 79.1775. And then, of course, that's plus the 0.12 times t, because I don't know what that last test score is yet. So if I knew what that last test score was, I could go ahead and just plug it in here, and this would calculate the average for me. On this case, though, I don't actually know what that average is because I don't know what that last test score is. I do know, however, that in this case, the student's aiming for an A in the class. And since we use a standard grading scale, that means the student's aiming for at least an average of 90. So really what I'm looking for is this average greater than or equal to a score of 90? And you could really use anything here. So if we were aiming for a B, we could say greater than or equal to 80. If we were looking for a C, we would say greater than or equal to 70. So we just want to make sure that whatever this average is, is greater than or equal to 90. So essentially what we can do now with this inequality is solve it for t. So I could take this inequality and first I would subtract 79.1775 from both sides, so that that's going to cancel on the left side. And then on the right side, I would just do 90 minus the 79.1775, which is 10.8225. And then to solve this the rest of the way for t, since this is 0.12 times t, I would solve that by doing the opposite of multiplication, which is division. So divide both sides by 0.12. And when I take that 10.8225 and divide it by 0.12, this tells me that t, which is the last test, has to be greater than or equal to 90.1875. So that means that in order to get an A in the class, the student would have to score at least a 90.1875%, which I would say, just to be safe, means get a 91 or higher, right? So if the student gets a 91 or higher, on the last test, then that means they'll have an A.